So the participants are gathering. We have 70 people registered, and at the present moment, at 15:04, 3:04, we have more than 30 people. I think we can start. You can put it in the chat. Should we wait for 3-5 minutes, or we should start our conference right now? Gulsara, let's start. Yes, let's start. Thank you. Hello again, dear participants. Thank you for joining us. Before I shall start looking at the points of our agenda, just a second. Next slide. Yes, this is our agenda for today. Before we start to look at it and at the reports that we have for today, I would like to say that the Deputat of Majlis and the expert the Deputy Ayjan Skakova has sent us a very detailed letter, a greeting letter, or I can say detailed analysis on the topic of today's discussion. She's giving us information that we're going to mention for sure, and we will look at certain points that are mentioned in the letter. There is detailed information that was presented by Jean on the perspectives and green energy sources, and also on the documents that will be approved in very recent time in Kazakhstan. So my task is to tell you about our initiative, and I will do some introduction to the topic. Last year in March, 1 year ago, just before Nowruz, we started the initiative that we called the Natural Capital and Sustainable Markets. We understand that these two aspects are interconnected, and the relationship between the capital and the market is changing all the time. Now we have very unsustainable situation. So the more attention is paid to the basic resources, especially for saving natural capital. The relationship that exists between the natural capital and the market status is covered by the agenda. It will include the climate change, the value of natural resources. We will look at the water, at a very important topic, the management approaches change in Kazakhstan. So this all is a changing situation, and that allows us to consider many things differently, look at the basic principles of saving ecosystem. And last time when we started the initiative, BCSD Kazakhstan, we also reviewed our priorities. What will be our focus for today? The role in this process we see to enhance the actions that should be taken by the business community, by government, by the population. It also correlates very well with the nature of action taken by the Entrepreneurs Association for Sustainable Development. We should say that the agenda changes quite quickly in Kazakhstan too, and it also looks at the natural capital. Different stakeholders take a lot of measures and programs, develop programs. I should say that In Kazakhstan, we have quite an outcome as per the reforms on the climate, on water sources, on ecosystems, but each stakeholder has its own priority. If you look at the range of the events that happened during the last 2 weeks, and yesterday there was a meeting between the Financial Control Agency with the Bank of Reconstruction and Development, we understand that the main question on the investment and financing of the markets is connected to the climatic agenda. And the government has done a lot for this matter. This is the net zero topic. We discuss reports for external parties and for the international arena. We also talk about the water, about the food sources, and many changes are made. If we talk about business, last year and this year we had a lot of conferences, we had some ratings, we had correlations with business, and business conducted some conferences. We talked about agricultural sector. So these things are very important for NGOs too. So if we talk about the international community and the development of the institutes, a lot is said about this topic. You remember that last year was the year of saving the ecosystems announced by UN, and then more than 120 experts participated in last year conference. Now we are connected as we started to cooperate with those who were also the initiators of our project. So we as a business association, we can hear the community, the science in the network. Let's save wild nature for the sustainability. And we see new initiatives, new publications every day. And this expert community has suggested a lot if to compare with the last year. And we can see that the trade platforms are also very active. We participate in the meetings of the Office on the Climate Change, but the outcomes are reached by each stakeholder on their own priorities. And unfortunately, not always we are interconnected. There is no one main topic that would cover all those issues that we need to consider. So we can say that there are a lot of actions, but the actions are a bit behind. The changes happen more quickly. Why do we think so? If we talk about the monetary equivalent, how the natural issues are budgeted, we can see in our Sustainable Goals report, there was a financial objective for the net zero, and it doesn't include the doctrine of net zero 2160, doesn't include the implementation of the projects and investment on the natural climatic decisions. You can get this report and you can see the gaps in the doctrine. So we suggest that business or other stakeholders get to know it in more detail, maybe you will have some other ideas on including something else into doctrine, maybe some other program documents that can be relevant. The list analysis of the association, you can always turn to us to BCSD, sorry, and we are always ready for cooperation. Another point that I would like to mention, we have said that the agenda is changing very quickly on the environment. We can see a lot of actions, but we don't see any coordination. There are not enough coordinated actions. We have to note a very important fact that all the stakeholders are waiting for business to act. And these are not just expectations that are voiced at the meetings, but they are written down in the obligations and in the documents. So we expect that business will take some actions. For example, in Green Kazakhstan program, you can see the list of companies that are responsible for this program, for the environmental decisions, but those decisions are not interconnected with other initiatives that can bring some economic use for the business. Also, the obligations on climate, we can see some renewed plan where it is said that in the next 7 years, we have to mobilize around $700 billion US, and we can see that the direct state investment into net zero will make just a small share from the total volume of investment. So we can understand from here that the private sector has also to be included in this and fulfill its obligations. So our investment obligations are written down in the range of documents, and they make quite a lot of sums. And we have to say that the net zero policies involve the energy sector. This is something mentioned by our Majlis participants and our other analytics. They say that mostly we talk about the energy sector. We talk about the measures in the document, in the renewed plan on the obligations of Kazakhstan. There are measures written. I should say that there are no environmental decisions. Among measures, we can see only the energy sector. We can see some adaptation measures written down separately, but we're not sure about the financing volume and how this is connected to the investment return. Unfortunately, we don't see anything about that. When we talk about the energy aspects, we can note that there are some major risks. For example, something that we cannot maybe, or we're not able to do, because it matters how we do it based on the decisions made. Risks are big, and we can, of course, understand that these are voluntarily obligations, but some things are not clear yet. So when we talk about the risks, that when we talk about the competitiveness of the enterprises in Kazakhstan in general, we have to find additional opportunities and solutions, and the agenda changes, and business needs some action, and the business has its obligation of investment. But with that, not every opportunity that would allow business to produce this investment economically effectively were considered. So at this session, the topic is the additional opportunities, additional obligations in the Republic of Kazakhstan and expanding trade with quotas, or how they're called, the offset projects. These will be projects coming out of the energy sector. We know that the big input are the solutions to sustain the green projects, so-called natural climatic decisions, and the input this will be for the participation of business in the climatic programs and for the government too. This is a working concept that was provided by the Global Economic Forum and the Global Council on Sustainable Development. We're very happy to have Julia Garban here, the director of the Alliance on the Natural Solutions for Climate. So Julia appeared on the screen. I would love to give the floor to her. Please allow me to say a couple of words about how I found out that Julia started to deal with such issues. She has huge experience in management in the global business and biodiversity program. You know that the biodiversity is also the safety of the ecosystems. And I will not talk about consortiums, and Julia has worked and she developed an idea of consortium that would unite different companies of different sectors with the local stakeholders and the local agencies, with community, with the agricultural complexes, so that they could collectively solve the problem of the environment issues. So I think this is very interesting for us. Besides this, Julia was a consultant in the oil and gas sector, NGOs and other stakeholders that could protect whales. This sense, yes, of what we can touch with our hands, what solutions we can really implement. So we will be the first ones to hear about the investments into carbon credits in order to enlarge the investment. Julia, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation and for the wonderful introduction. It is a real honor to be here with you. I think the opportunity of speaking to such a great audience of committed businesses, and something that is so global, such as climate change and nature loss, and seeing that you are all engaged, it is an incredible opportunity. As it was said, I work for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I lead the project that is called Natural Climate Solution Alliance, which is co-convened by WBCSD, but also the World Economic Forum. And it is a multi-stakeholder coalition of what I say always is like a like-minded organization that come from business, from NGOs and solution providers. And they all really believe that natural climate solution can be part of the solution to climate change and biodiversity loss. So it is really inspiring to see, the diversity of, people coming from different walks of life, really with the same vision, and the questions on how to make it happen in a way that is credible. I come from a conservation side. I've been in IUCN for the International Union for Conservation of Nature for 15 years. As you said, I worked on many projects focusing on business in nature, one of which actually was the Western Grey Whale in Sakhalin. And again, I had the pleasure to work with so many businesses that address their footprint on nature. Now we have a moment where we have to address all the footprints. We are in an urgent, incredibly difficult time where it's not about should we do a bit of nature or climate. Unfortunately, we have to do it all. So remind me how much time I have for the presentation.
We still have 20 minutes for your presentation and maybe a few minutes for questions, if they will appear from the audience. Я прошу, если будут вопросы к Джулии, можете писать в чат или напрямую задавать.
If you have any questions for Julia, you can write them in the chat or ask them directly. Thank you.
Right. So I will share a slide, a set of slides, which I will then send you so that you can circulate among all the members. What is interesting is also that at the end, there is a reading list of a lot of the things that, the blogs and reports that the Alliance has generated in the past couple of years. So there is a lot of interesting reading there. And again, an invitation to join us. All right. So let me make sure that I do this correctly. Right. Really, my presentation is about Natural Climate Solution. I'm not going to pitch for the Natural Climate Solution Alliance today, but of course, it's always open and you will have my contacts later and you can always call me later to discuss, how you would like to be more involved. But really today is about talking about the opportunity of using nature as a solution. Let me just put this here. And I would like to start with the fact that there is international recognition for this. I was just the beginning of the week, in Geneva, there is the scientific body of and technical body of the Convention on Biological Diversity discussing the global biodiversity framework, which should be then discussed and adopted in China at the end of the summer. As you know, this is one of the processes that was supposed to happen in 2020. And I think one of the major, the most important actually time, deadline in this framework is 2030, just like the IPC, the UNFCCC, declaration, Glasgow Climate Pact. Both processes talk about nature. The detail, they don't say, neither of them talks about nature-based solutions or natural climate solutions, but that's a political issue. And let's not get into that. That's not the point. The point is that both of them describe actually what is a nature-based solution for climate. And actually Target 8, which is a draft in the CBD Global Biodiversity Framework, even set a quantitative target for how much they think nature could contribute to climate mitigation. Is a 10 gigaton of CO2 equivalent. This is really very much a number that is absolutely in line with all the estimates that have been generated in the past about the potential of nature to for climate mitigation. Article 21 of the Glasgow Climate Pact, which has been approved in Glasgow in November, also emphasized the importance of protecting, conserving, and restoring nature. So this is the definition of a nature-based solution for climate, right? And they're talking about all ecosystems, forests, other terrestrial habitats. So this is really an opportunity that two main international processes are actually coming together. Maybe they don't really realize yet, to actually ask for the same thing. Can we be smart and use our investment in conservation of in biodiversity conservation, which is absolutely needed, because also there is a biodiversity crisis, to help the climate crisis, but also the just transition problem. This is huge also. We need to define, solutions for climate change, but we have to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, especially, giving opportunities to local communities and indigenous peoples to actually have an alternative way to generate livelihoods if it's not about, large-scale agriculture or selling their land, right? This is an opportunity. Like all opportunities, it really depends on how we implement it. So the how is so important. And this is what the MCS Alliance is really about, is we need to talk about the how. We have to pay attention to the details about how the natural climate solutions movement is going to generate credits and sell credits to companies. Yeah, so again, this is a bit of the science, and it's not just, first of all, we know all, and happy to share also some really interesting and, a bit sad readings, but about scientifically what is the link between nature and climate. There was a really good report done by the IPCC and IPBES, so basically the two intergovernmental scientific bodies that look at, assess biodiversity. One, IPBES and IPCC, looking at the climate science. And both of them assess, the fact that we are in a crisis, but they came together to look at how these two crises actually come together. And it's clear the two support each other in a negative loop. So we need to get out of this negative loop and allow nature and climate support each other into recovery. And certainly this is also talks about the importance, therefore, of, if you have a healthy nature, this will also help climate. And, climate mitigation will also help regenerate nature. The other important element is that emissions from the land sector is the second largest source of global emissions, so 24% according to IPCC. So it's not just about the use of energy, right? It's really about how do we use our land. And these are the, AFOLU sectors, so agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. And it is really important that we pay attention to these sectors more and more about what actions they put in place to reduce and remove carbon, that is emitted through these land practices. But again, they can do it in a way that not only addresses carbon, or let's say climate mitigation, but also addresses the natural, the biodiversity crisis. So again, we need to think about how do we do both at the same time, complex, but possible. So basically, overall, I think the projections that, especially those that were shared before, just on time for the Glasgow summit, is really that we cannot achieve the 1.5 degree world without using nature. And nature is a natural sink. The problem is today nature is actually a net emitter, because once you have, you start subtracting all the land-based emissions, nature is not capable anymore to do its role as a natural sink. So we really need to regenerate, the capacity of nature to act as a sink. So this means measures that will conserve nature. So the remaining areas that have, that are sink of large amounts of carbon, they should be conserved and preserved. Improve the management of land to be able to sequester more carbon, and restore land in order to create opportunities for conservation and for creating more sink. Now, all this with biodiversity at heart, because we know the science, you can't really have a balanced system and a resilient system if this is not underpinned by biodiversity. So it's not just about trees, it's about biodiversity, which is a very different. And the other element that is really part of an effective solution is to involve people from the beginning to be part of the solution, not just beneficiaries, really the structure behind the solution, because then they will become full-time stewards of these models that really look at nature as actually a way of creating also income for communities and indigenous peoples. So this is how, on our journey to net zero, which should happen not later than 2050, with halving of our emission by 2030. This is what the UNFCCC and the parties in Glasgow really committed to. You can see that how the green is avoided emissions and the yellow is enhanced sequestration are part of the cut, right? So the gray is really about decarbonization by all sectors. But then there is also a big opportunity, and this is 30% of this is for the near term opportunity. So it's actually much bigger in the near term than in the long term, of coming from avoided emissions and enhanced sequestration coming from nature. So this is really, to recap, this is why, overall nature climate solutions have a huge potential. Again, the estimates really are based on a number of assumptions. There is in the list, I think, or maybe I will send you another really interesting reference that has taken different studies to look at what is the real potential. The potential, obviously, we are talking about economically viable potential, also depends obviously on the cost of carbon, the price of carbon, and how much, in the challenge of getting, also making sure that we are not infringing also the food, making sure that we are not going to create risk in terms of the food value chain. And so there are some basically between 5 and 11.7 gigaton of CO2 emission removed per year by 2030. And the nature positive potential measured in dollars, being this is the amount of money that can go to on the ground to close the investment gap, is around 20 billion. If we are taking the 10 gigaton times a $10 per credit. Now, per ton. This is interesting because you have around $100 billion US dollars per year. That is what the CBD will ask parties to commit to close the financial gap, the finance gap. So now just a quick overview of what is an MBS and what is an NCS. I have to use both terms because I inherited them, but to be honest, if I could start from the beginning, I would say we are talking about nature-based solutions for climate, nature-based solutions that have climate mitigation co-benefit. Right now, the community has two different terms, but I would really, encourage everybody to define NCS as taking the MBS definition, which is the one that is here, actually comes from UNEA, so the UN Environment Assembly that just approved this definition last week. It is based on the IUCN definition. And this definition also is supported by a standard that clearly says what are the principles behind. So it's already much more tangible than just a series of words. You can go back and say, okay, how do we do a proper project that actually has all the right elements to be able to deliver a nature-based solutions that is credible and is effective? So my suggestion is to call a natural climate solution a nature-based solutions that addressing climate mitigation. So a nature-based solution that has carbon mitigation co-benefits rather than the other way around. Natural climate solutions, therefore, there are a lot of different types. Here are some of the most common ones today, but there are more and more. Here is more about, when I say more and more, it's not that there is not technology, but it's more about finding methodologies to be able to measure the added value in terms of climate mitigation. And in this methodology are very technical and they're not yet available for all types. So all types, we're talking about reforestation, avoided conversion. So, this is really conserving the existing forest, improve forest management, and this is for more the forest. And then, of course, we have also coastland, coastal areas. So we are talking about wetlands, we are talking about peatlands, and we are talking, again, we are talking about conservation, so maintenance of what is there, which is critical and probably the most cost-effective solution, to then restoration, which is also effective, but also definitely more expensive. In terms of the potential, here you see where, distributed by type. You will see some of the reports actually have this. And it's interesting to see how, the different solutions actually pan out in the different countries. So you have a lot of, am I the one writing? No, something is happening to the slides. There are a lot of, country-wise, we have different countries that have been assessed in terms of where the potential is. And here you're talking about, the the three main intervention areas being protection, management, and restoration, and how the three come together in terms of potential in different type of countries. Now, as I said, the key is how, so quality, right? So let's talk, when I say how, for me is what is the quality? So the quality means the role that this biodiversity and people will play in delivering these permanent changes. And it's a must, right? It's not about, the natural climate solution will generate carbon mitigation, climate mitigation measures, and maybe some biodiversity gains in people and benefit for people. No, the real quality is about a solution will be based on biodiversity gain and benefits for people, and then it will deliver carbon mitigation benefits. But you also need to have very strong principles for measuring carbon to ensure that there is permanence, that they address leakages, double counting, and a whole series of other issues that are of absolute importance. And to be honest, not only if we are talking about these interventions as a carbon credit, which of course is important because you will have to account for them, but even if you're not planning to do a retirement, we need to know how much. It is really important because we are looking at basically a global, balance sheet today. And we need to understand how much we are, balancing the emissions with the reductions in avoidance. So it is important to measure well, but also to make sure that whatever project we do, whatever intervention is not going to create leakages, for example, which is a really important issue, which means basically because avoiding that by doing, an intervention in an area, you're going to just move the bad practice somewhere else. Other important issues about quality is the role that a jurisdictional approach, which means basically a system approach, system from an ecological perspective, but also a system from a political perspective. That means it's not just a project, but it's a program of interventions where also the reforms are part of the solution. And then also a very important element is to make sure that the NCS interventions really follow the hierarchy, where we say conservation actions are the most effective. Then you have management actions, so land management, land improvement are the second most, and then restoration. Another very important point, which is really where we have a lot to work with, also bridging the gap with a lot of the critics around the use of natural climate solution by business, is the question about using these as compensation in addition to decarbonization. And here we have to be very careful and very precise with the words, which I will try to be. These measures, so when we say we want to promote the use of beyond value chain decarbonization, i.e. compensation, is really about asking companies to first and foremost adopt science-based targets, have a journey to net zero, and then go above and beyond that and take what is residual every year, which is what basically in this slide is the gray bar, above basically time on the time axis, and compensate for that, right? This is really especially important for hard to abate sectors that have a journey to net zero that will probably have still for the first years very high emissions because of technological limitations or investments limitations. And this is therefore, what we call beyond value chain decarbonization. This is also aligned with SBT language. And it's about using avoidance, reduction, or removal credits to balance out a company entire footprint on a yearly basis. This is in addition to in-value decarbonization, where you can also use natural climate solutions as measures to avoid and reduce emissions, to reduce your company footprint if it comes from land. Now, the third area, sorry, I want to go back. Is at the target year, basically the year where you have achieved your net zero status, you might still have some residual emission that you will maintain for the lifetime of your operations. And this will be acceptable because they have been demonstrated that you can't go to absolute zero. And this is where, according to science-based targets and the net zero guidelines, this is where you have to act with neutralization. So using removal credits to balance out the truly unavoidable emissions. So basically here we are talking about the NCS Alliance is really about, going back to this gray, along your journey to net zero, and convince companies and promote the need to actually invest all of that, or at least part of that, in carbon credits that will generate a compensation for two reasons. One is because we want to really push to get to net zero as fast as possible, and we cannot avoid any emissions on the journey to net zero. And also because this will create an opportunity for conservation of nature. So this is really the carbon finance lever that where we say, the use of a carbon credit tool can also contribute to nature conservation and address that crisis. So what sectors can most contribute or use? In the insetting aspect, so in the use within the value chain, obviously all sectors that have land-based emissions, so agriculture, forestry, and other land use, should really look into using natural climate solutions to avoid or lower the emissions coming from the value chain. So in scope 1, if there are landowners, or scope 3, if this is through the supply chain. And therefore, you really implement measures that not only look at carbon, but actually use nature to address carbon. Then beyond the value chain, I think the priority is really with sectors that have hard to abate emissions. That means sectors that will have for the initial years still a very steep curve, a lot of emissions coming. And these are the recognized hard to abate. We're talking about airlines, steel, aluminum, cement, oil and gas, and energy utilities. Now, on the NCS value chain, and I think I'm not sure actually if this is we will have a similar complex value chain for a normal carbon credit, that it doesn't come from a natural climate solution, but certainly in the nature space, we have a lot of actors that are generally not involved in the climate world. And these are, the stewards of the land. So we are talking about local communities, indigenous peoples, but also environmental conservation NGOs that are part of the developing these projects on the ground. And these projects are complex, right? We are not, we, of course, it's not just about costs, but there is like the complexity about, restoring and conserving areas. It's about bringing people together. It's about having scientific studies, scientific baseline. So it is, by basically doing large conservation projects that have to be right from all sides, from the conservation, from the justice, so therefore making sure that people are on board, and also generating the carbon credits. But once you have projects, then there is a whole value chain between the project on the ground that generates this credit and a number of other stages that take the credit, package it, makes it available, refine it, verifies it, and then goes into the hand of the end users, which are the companies that will retire. So here, for example, we use some of the companies that have signed up to the investment accelerator, therefore companies that have committed to retire credits, and these are Unilever, Bayer, BCG, McKinsey, and Bank of America, and I forgot actually PwC. These are companies that have committed to and have demonstrated that actually they have a science-based target, a journey to net zero, and therefore they are going to use these credits to compensate what they can't decarbonize on a yearly basis, but with the understanding that this will go down and go to the net zero at certain point. So exactly, these are the conditions for ensuring demand side integrity. This is where the Natural Climate Solution Alliance has worked very hard in the past 2 years, defining in a multi-stakeholder fashion, what do we mean by high integrity demand side? What does it mean that we believe, we say certain companies actually have done all what they can to decarbonize on a yearly basis. They have a clear journey to net zero that is consistent with the Paris Agreement. And therefore, these companies can use carbon compensation beyond their value chain in a way that it will not be greenwashing. It will be credible, and they should go out and and share. And this is where we come as a campaign. So we have a whole set of requirements which are published or made but what is important is that these requirements were developed in a multi-stakeholder fashion with companies and organized NGOs that work in the conservation space and in the climate space. These requirements also include conditions for high quality. So basically we are asking companies to also commit to purchase NCS credits in a way that will not undermine their impact on people, biodiversity, and also the climate, opportunities. So basically, overall, this is part of the work we are doing to the NCS Alliance. This image here summarizes our theory of change, right? We say we need to build trust in the market, in companies, and the market really brings together all of us to scale up the use of natural climate solutions in a way that will contribute to climate mitigation and to conservation of nature. And so there are a number of actors involved. So there is no way, we will claim as Natural Climate Solution Alliance that we are doing it all, because it's a very complex process. It's a big system, in fact, that we are trying to influence. And here are some of the key actors and their contribution through the different actions. So I think let me start from a very important one, which is the improving the market architecture. This is key, right? Any market to function, you need to have some kind of, even if it's a voluntary market, like in this case, you really need to have some kind of rules and, even commonly agreed rules. So a key player in here is the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets. And they are now very well advanced in defining core carbon principles that will help all sectors and all actors actually to develop carbon credits. So this is not specific to natural climate solutions credits, but to all credits to be developed in a way that will properly deliver in a credible way. Then you have to define more, the regulatory clarity. There are a number of actors there, but of course, UNFCCC and also the adoption of Article 6 rulebook in November has played a really important role to define who are the actors in the space of using carbon credits in the regulated market, as well as in the voluntary market. Then you have claims, which is really important because this will help avoid greenwashing, but not only, will also help define a business case for companies to actually do it, right? Because you're going to give them something that is worth something, is worth, have a value in marketing terms. Of course, this has to be done with very clear standard behind it. Then there are two more actions that we felt are important. One is to highlight good practice, and this is where the NCS Alliance and the Nature for Climate coalitions are really structured to do. So promote what are good projects on the ground, generate stories from the ground, from voices from people, voices from scientists, demonstrating that these interventions actually have generated also benefits for people and nature, and send a clear demand signal, which is the investment accelerator, that which actually we are just going to launch next Tuesday during a series of webinars, promoting what we are doing, to get more companies to embrace the idea of using natural climate solutions. So this is basically what we are going to launch, and it's really a campaign to get more companies on board, and also more companies to aggregate those who are already embracing natural climate solutions beyond their value chain, but also to help those who are not to understand better what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and how to use it. I mean, this is also why I'm here today, to give you a sneak preview of all the issues. And of course, if there is a need or an interest to go more in depth about this, we'll be happy to deliver, a more structured series of webinars in the future to really help understand the details and get you to understand who is who, so that you can actually, partner with other organizations to go ahead and, and retire NCS credits. So this is where we stand. You know, the NCS Investment Accelerator has an ambition to aggregate 1 gigaton of CO2 reductions or avoided emissions by 2025, which is a lot. The 6 companies we have today, we have a 2 million. So we have a large gap to fill, but that's what I'm there to do, right? To get more companies on board and give them the inspiration to fill that gap. And this is the Natural Climate Solution Alliance. More information on that are available on the website. And just to go back to key priorities, because as I said, you know, it's a system that we are creating and we are far from being done. There are a lot of pieces that are still being developed and, you know, more people behind them, the better. So as I said, for claims that are being developed by the Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative, Integrity Initiative, and there is also going to be the science-based targets developing some guidance. On the quality for NCS, as I said, there is the Integrity Council for VCM working on core principles, but there is also the IUCN NBS standard that can be used to define what a high quality, effective NCS is. And that's all from my side. This is my email. You can write me. You can follow the NCS Alliance on LinkedIn. We just have launched the accounts, you know, a week ago. So we're happy to have, you know, followers. And don't hesitate really to contact me. And obviously I will follow up directly with the Secretariat to see, you know, if they're interested to have more, you know, conversations about this topic. You will see that there is a whole list of links here that you can, you know, download other presentation, other pieces of, you know, positions and ideas on this topic. So I will stop sharing now and see. Stop sharing. Right.
Thank you so much, Julia. It was very interesting, and we need time to digest all this information. And from the chat discussion, I can see that people are not there yet. But we have an expert who has the solutions in hand. We have some people from the industry. They say that the emissions from the metallurgy or something is energy bigger, and why we should, like, you know, I think we need time to digest, to think, and also but people were interested, so we have a big audience here. And I believe that this opportunity should be in Kazakhstan. Some experts, they propose a particular solutions already, maybe a bit different than others. Me personally, I have some questions, but maybe I'll make it online or next time, or I will ask the audience if they have questions right now. If not, then we will come back to you in a writing form.
Yeah.
And we'll, yeah.
I just want to be sure that, I mean, especially if there are clarification questions, it's so important to make sure that we are on the same page, because I found the let's say the terms are really complex sometimes, and they mean different things to different people.
But you made it clear, absolutely. It was easy.
Okay, I'm glad I did.
I think it was quite clear and easy, and you covered all the points our people were interested in, like financial part, the solutions itself, quite important, and how we could put it in our plans and strategies, I believe. But just to go the idea that this is an opportunity we have to discover. This is quite important for us to hear from the, like you said, you had one slide with the demand. So we should create a demand for this. First, people, awareness that there exists something else, and any types of credits and any types of action. Then, from the demand part, we can move to the real trading or project implementation.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly the dynamic that we have to create. We have to create a demand because, and I do understand business. I mean, I was with some companies this week in Geneva for the CBD, and people saying, but we're already doing science-based targets. We already on, we have all this. Yes, unfortunately, it's not enough almost, because we are in this situation where we have, science says both on climate side and conservation side that if we don't turn our, around by 2030, our fate is really not going in the right direction. We need immediate, bold actions. And I think there are a lot of opportunities here for leaders, like companies that really want to show leadership and say, we are going to do more, because here it is about doing more. It is about doing more. And, but I think maybe I'm naive that companies that will do more will be recognized. And what we can do is to help protect from the criticism, because we are creating this coalition. And I'm just thinking, maybe we could imagine like an NCSA at the national level, if you want to have.
Yeah, the idea we want to present at the end of the discussion, create something similar to the Alliance, but back here in Kazakhstan to learn more and start to discover this area. Yeah, we already have people who wants to join us. And from the business side, business association, industry, NGOs, science, and people with technologies and resources to this.
Yeah, and I'll be very happy to help you to, at the beginning, to start to get, and to keep the connection so that the ideas and the path is the same. But I do understand that, especially in the conversation with the civil society, it is important to go at the national level. That basically is your civil societies are different than civil society for countries in the UK or others. So it's in those, and they have to be on board, because that's a really key important element, especially for the integrity, for the feeling that, and then they get attacked. So how do we prevent that, right? How do we actually create a support for these companies?
Yeah, and that's be accepted. Okay, Julia, I have to thank you so much for your great input to our event, to the idea and promotion of the nature-based solution back here in Kazakhstan. And now I think we will close this part of the discussion and move, because we're running out a little bit of the agenda. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Я от имени взяла на себя смелость, от имени нашей...
I took the responsibility, because this group that works closely in cooperation, we have monthly meetings. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you. That is why if somebody wants to connect to our meetings and to look at those issues in more detail, they will be covered by our association, and we can develop this topic further on. So in our agenda, we are a bit behind because we started a bit late. We have some interesting questions from the agenda. I would like to give the floor to Bulat Yesekin. He will give his position on how important it is to keep the ecosystem and what are the opportunities for green investment in Kazakhstan. And I want to say also so that Bulat is working in Parliament, and his last presentation was on the 14th of March on the perspectives on the water resources management and on natural resources. So, Bulat, please, the floor is yours. Can you hear me? I couldn't hear you. Yes? Okay. I will turn my presentation on, but I cannot hear you, any of you. So I have the same report with the same topic. It is called like this. We know that there are different mechanisms, and we talked about the failures of the market, that the nature doesn't have specific evaluation, and natural capital doesn't have the evaluation. I, as a part of the UN expert group, was talking about that, and now when we talk about the climate change, the market started to react, and now we have opportunities for uniting the market and the natural value. And this is something that we should look for, because many companies understand that, but they are unclear on what they can do. So I will talk about the Basin Social Corporation, because I have been advertising it for several years, and this approach for Kazakhstan is necessary. The structure of my report, I will talk about the ecosystems. I have to know the investment into nature. They shouldn't be point by point, yes, into, for example, trees or technologies. They should be based on the ecosystem principle, because this is the most important principle. The second point, I will talk about investment into nature. I thought that Julia would talk about that, but she was talking about the carbon investment. I will have a different example, and I will also give an example for investment, and an important part that I don't have full information.
I'll show this slide. The limits to growth, depletion of the natural potential of the planet can lead to a global catastrophe, from conflicts and even wars. So starting 2020, it was predicted that there will be a decline in production, and there was already in the 70s a negative dynamic in manufacturing, grain manufacturing market. You know, the crisis started back when this group, headed by Dennis Meadows, just started preparing this report. And KPMG confirmed this forecast last year. See, they coincide completely. They confirmed this forecast, and the Roman Club had several scenarios, and KPMG confirmed that the world development is going according to the worst case scenario. And moreover, some things like pollution and resources will be declining fast. These slides, you know, this one is from 10 years ago, this one is from last year. These explain the reasons for this crisis. So the green is the planetary boundaries, and we've went above and outside these planetary boundaries for some spheres. But the biggest violations have to do with the fact that there's an issue with biodiversity. And the example is very much visible in our region. We got a new desert. This here is 2 years ago, there was a dust storm from in the Aral region in Ashgabat. So the roads, everything was scattered with this toxic dust. These are our villages a bit further from the capital city. And this UNDP report on human development was there. It was written by Johannes Lin. from the World Bank, former, and they calculated that the damage from this, for the environmentalists, it's much more important that the natural basis is destroyed, not only for economics, but for life. This is a picture of the Aral sturgeon, which was feeding all of the Soviet Union. And the decline in the Caspian Sea down to almost zero from 30,000 tons. And this here says why we need to defend and protect biodiversity and natural ecosystems. We don't think about that too much. So our ecosystems, they support the climate stability, the global circulation of water, soil fertility, and many other processes that many people don't even have any idea about, but they're necessary and indispensable for life on our planet. There are calculations done to substantiate that. So the laws of nature are the basis of life, and all the laws of human society regulating economic, political, and social things are secondary. So the environmental laws that are in the code, their status should be higher. Of course, if they're written and they take into account natural laws and they don't just take into account political interests of certain groups, like it is in our current code. And climate change is the most visible part. It's what Julia was talking about as well, and two quotes from the UN Secretary General, that the world is on track for a catastrophic warming. And he's also saying that today, everybody who does climate, they understand that changes are there and they will happen, and we need it to, at least 50% of all climate finance should go towards adaptation. And Dennis Meadows was in Moscow recently. There was a big interview about his report 50 years later, and he said, forget about sustainable development, learn how to survive in the environment of a crisis. And this is from our Kazakhstani slides, our national reports. These numbers here, the water deficit that Tokayev even talked about, the president last autumn at a conference, or yield reduction. These are huge numbers, and I think these are careful numbers because the fact that we have natural shifts in half deserts and deserts arising where we grow wheat, and droughts that we already faced last year, and no more inflow into the Sirdarya. I think all of that is speeding up. Will be faster than we said. It won't be 50 or 100 years. It's already happening now, tomorrow. I'm going to show you this slide that was developed by the UNDP. They've developed measures on adaptation in different sectors of the economy. And the main measures are not just about technology and drip irrigation. We need to take the whole budget system of planning and review it for criteria of climate funding and climate change adaptation, like they did in the UK. So not a single penny from the budget should be spent if it doesn't respond to the criterion and requirements of climate change. For instance, using more water or increasing energy efficiency and things like that. This report is part 2 from the WEF report, where they also say we're breaking the laws of nature, that traditionally the world's GDP is created by using natural resources, but the UN report said that over 75% of the planet's natural ecosystems are degraded. And so there was this initiative that came about on the New York Stock Exchange. They launched a page dedicated to natural asset companies last fall, and they will reflect the value of nature and provide savings based on the vital assets that underpin the entire economy and make life on Earth possible. And the economic potential of natural assets is calculated using methodologies of these international organizations, and it amounts to more than $125 trillion. That's dozens of times more than over total sales of oil, gold, and metal, gas. So it seems that the market of natural assets and investments into natural solutions will be key. So many companies are already starting to look at that, do their counting. So it's a new important investment field. And the methodologies are there, and everything was prepared in order for countries to be able to place their values related to natural capital, and based on these assessments would be attracting investments. Now, of course, the main asset is the earth, the nature, the untouched territories. So those territories that were not planted with plants, even artificial forestation already makes the lands not pristine. Natural, pristine lands. If we think that we plant a lot of trees in a row, it's like you take a car and line all the parts up in a row and think that it's going to work, because we don't know how things work in nature. And this is the Lake Balkhash. This is one of the largest ecosystems on the planet, huge in its land area, and it includes quite a few valuable natural objects. And of course, we calculated back in 2000 with the Ministry of Economy the potential for investing into a green economy of this basin of the Balkhash for renewable energy sources and other things. The valuable fish, more than 53,000 tons of fish products per year. Put that into current prices, right? And besides, this is a subsidized region. You have agricultural lands, pastures, ecosystems, tourism, many things that are still waiting for investors, because all of the companies that work there still use the principle of extracting resources, especially industrial companies. And the fact that this lake has a fundamental role of a regulator, supporting the life of thousands of rivers and lakes, human health, and the economy of the entire basin. Not a lot of people think about that. I always give the example that Almaty citizens probably don't know what the relation that they have is with Balkhash. And McKinsey in 2013 forecasted that we're going to lose Balkhash if we continue with business as usual, and there will be a disaster. It was just like with the Aral Sea, and that was 10 years ago. And nothing has changed since then, although they calculated that this deficit, this disaster can be prevented. Even with a profit, they counted for different lines of investments. This is by far not the most profitable one, just replacing some of the cultures of the crops. And this gives a huge savings of water and income to the population. But this plan was never put into action. The government didn't do anything. The state administration didn't do anything. In 2007, we tried to, for the whole year in a row, there was this EU project, and we were studying the gaps in the management system. And there was a government decree on this adilet.kz website where they had these phrases that the current basin management system based on fragmented powers and short-term actions does not allow solving existing problems and does not contribute to the consolidation of actions, and we need to switch to basin management. Now, this slide here is from the Balkhash 2000 forum. Nothing's changed apart from that. These functions shifted to the Ministry of Agriculture and Environment, and the ministry's changed, but still management is targeted in resource space. There's nobody there that cares overall for this ecosystem. And that's why we're saying that as all of this is tied to survival, so the destruction, I mean, in the roadmap that is part of the adaptation project, they offered a systemic approach that allows to holistically approach and manage these natural objects. And we use the UNDP forecast for 50 and 100 years up front, and there are 4 regions. They developed 4 packages of measures for them. And the basin approach will allow to preserve water and other ecosystems that go beyond the boundaries and goals of regions, individual sectors, and industry programs. And if you take the 4 regions that you have in this basin, and you look at whether they have ecosystem preservation goals for Balkhash, they don't. Their approach is to get as much resources as possible and elevate the economy, so they continue to destroy the roots that feed all of the ecosystem in all the communities that live around this region. And this approach will allow, as I already said, it's a huge potential that is higher than the potential of many territories of Europe and the US. Huge unused potential. And today, thanks to this fragmented short-term management system based on narrow interest, it continues to destroy this region. And if we destroy this ecosystem, and the Balkhash Lake ecosystem is very vulnerable, unlike the Aral, which is 60 meters deep, this will not be restored. It's like cutting the roots of the tree, and then no matter how many dollars you put in, it won't grow back. So this whole system is a unified system. The local climate, everything, it's all interconnected, the land, the water. So it will just be a new big ulcer instead of this big prospering region. And this basin approach, only that allows to see how too much water consumption in Almaty is related to Balkhash, how their Saribulak flows are connected to Balkhash, and how that needs to be changed. Why the car washing using this water matters, that they're destroying their future. Or the indicators to negotiate with China, how much water we need and for what needs the water consumers here. We have different groups here, agriculture, rice there, this needs to be changed. And they need to implement water savings, water efficiency. And only this approach, and I made this for the SDG report, only that report will help identify the specific values, not how much is produced from renewable energy sources, but how much is that needed, because with every increase in percentage, behind that you have costs, and we need to know the exact value. So the basin approach is like looking at this as a live organism, where we know that the body temperature is 36.7 and the pulse is like this, the pressure is like this, the pH level is like that, not more, not less. This is not a competition between SDGs, who provides more, but the exact values you can only get when we put them on one map. Look at this as one ecosystem organism, and then the industrial companies will know. Like I'm showing here the WWF project for restoring the tiger. There's the tiger, what they feed on, the boars and the kulons, that they have a natural reserve for that, and there's a restoration of plants going on, and they should have timely water. And the interconnection of all of these goals, the Kapshigai, HPP, what needs to be changed, only all of that together can give the preservation of this goal, the 341 meters, the critical level of the lake. And only this approach can tell you what specialists you're going to need, what scientific research you're going to need. It's not just like they do today. Many ministries define and give grants for research, and they prepare specialists. All of that is being done intuitively by certain criteria, but only this approach will give an understanding of what specialists you need here and in this point, when and what scientific research, what standards are needed. Only the basin approach will provide the basis for standards. And right now, we only have a sanitary and hygienic standards book that, although it's different from the WHO. So international experience is very broad. We've studied in the translated reports from Tennessee, 1933, TVA, these engineers. There was this corporation of military engineers, and they have this huge state within a state with possibilities to invest in water supply and energy for social projects and other examples. And their main principle and experience is that the basins of rivers and lakes, ecosystems, should be the basis of management, not administrative or regional boundaries, not a sectoral approach, energy and water separately, not like that. And the goal is to preserve the ecosystem. As already said, the role of the Balkhash Lake should be the super goal for everyone. And to have that, they all need to be involved and participate. They need to look at that not theoretically, but to see how all of that exists, who's doing what, when it's being done, what the investments are that are there, and what are the possibilities for the state. Of course, they need to be formalized. This cooperation needs to be formalized into one management body, not the nominal Basin Management Council that we have now that don't have the authority to decide something, but they should have long-term right authority to manage water and land. So shifting to a basin management requires a transition to basin management principles. It needs to involve the public and business in the programs. Like the Almaty citizens, they don't care what's going on with the RLC or in Balkhash. We don't see the connection there, and I can tell you that this form of basin corporations will overcome all these gaps. And the main difference, of course, is that it makes sure that nature is key. It provides alienation because it gives shares to the population of the territory who will be gaining profits from restoration of fish or developing solar energy or micro HPPs or developing organic food, which in the Balkhash and Kazakhstan we have a lot of opportunities for. So these kind of investments and actions will make anyone, not necessarily from Almaty, but anyone from Europe, to care for their shares to grow, and they pass it to their children. And as one governor told me at Ural negotiations in Moscow, he said, if I had an opportunity to get shares from recovering the sturgeon in the Ural, then we would profit strongly from that.
That is why such corporation is open. It can work in bonds or with gas payments because it takes an opportunity to solve different issues that even with the enhancement of the negotiation group or creating an institute or agreements are not effective if we don't change the approach. So we need to see how to better provide water for Aral Sea and what will be a joint benefit. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan doesn't have any benefits for going water, for having water going down. So it should be the interagency, but I think we should rely more on the local agencies, those who are in this real system. So the practical steps, we have to create a community council on preservation of the ecosystem of the basin as the basis and this is not forbidden by law, with the participation of government, business, and population. So we might not know the value, like we heard the origins, exchanging it for exchanging the precious stones for this. Also evaluate the cost of the natural capital and the ecosystem services in the basin on the international method. Distribute the shares at the international stocks as well as among population and enterprises in the basin. Define priority projects and start their implementation. So with such approach, we can overcome the local obstacles, so we can enhance the ministries, because the main economic facility in Kazakhstan is to take more resources and to make them the benefit. So the preservation of eco-sustainability is very important now. So the sustainable energy, the education, and everything, ecological goals, environmental goals are the most important ones for 2050. So this is a political consensus, and they're the most important as the roots of the tree, so that the tree could give some medications, give some energy. So the climate change shows that the environmental objective became the #1. Investment into nature preservation are more profitable than the natural resource money, because the market and business reacts very fast to these stimuli and standards, and they can change their investment. They are not just they're not just pro this, and you can see all the pluses. So the Balkhash project can be a unique example for investment into green assets and distributing it in other regions. So this is the territories that was abandoned, and it is very rich for Aral Sea, for Caspian, for Balkhash. This is where all the economics, the industry, and the population is. So thank you. I cannot hear you for some reason. I will try to exit and enter again. Just a second. Bulat, we could hear you very well. Everything was okay, and I hope everybody heard you. Yes, I'm with you once again. Can you hear me now? Thank you very much, Bulat. Thank you, Alexandra, for commenting. You have a classical contents so that you could study the management of change. Your examples show that we have to include some tools for these ideas. These ideas are very relevant, or even we are a bit behind that, but we have to do it in a professional manner. So recently we looked at the report. The business shows us the competencies and the community has high ethical norms, and we have to draw this mutual effort. We cannot see for 20, 30 years the situation is not moving, and we had a solution for basins, and we once again don't have them. So this is, of course, the question of management, and this information is making us to think about the transformation of change, and once again put it on a higher level, on the governmental level. We are trying to do some things. There is a comment. May we add something? So I heard your report and I agree with those problems. So in general, we have it in the Eco Code, and there is a strategic environmental evaluation. This is a program that exists on the regional level, and also we have to use those. We have such a good tool, such as an eco expertise when the projects come for coordination. We have to coordinate them, so we don't have a qualified evaluation on how the ecosystem will change with the implementation on one or the other project. And the qualification, when I read it, I really see how incompetent this is, just giving a permission, giving a permit. This is also a problem, so we have to make it more strict. Yeah, we understand your position, Aigul, and we can see that this is a working instrument for industrial ones. So we have to consider the environment in a different angle. So it's voluntarily participation, what Bulat is telling now. This gives you an opportunity to receive benefits on your voluntarily actions to protect the environment. But I cannot agree to full with you, so we need more experts who understand the science, institutes. So we talk about even planting trees. And I'm in a big hurry to say, so we are behind by 20 minutes according to the agenda. I will be very fast, Aigul. I have been working in the system of Roscom Природа when we created those tools, and I know all that stuff. So we had all this basin councils and control and other tools. you can see that the standards are very different from what we do. If you look at the criteria, you can see something that is advertised. It is not anyhow decoded. So we still have the very point-to-point approach. Why the state expertise is such ineffective tool? Because they do it on a very, local matter. So how could you give this permit? So they say, but the ministry gave us the permit. They don't even have a tool. All those tools that we can see now, you can dive in more depth. I think these things are very important and we're putting them down. Thank you, Aygul, for participation. The next issue, we talk about big project with Pulat, such as EcoK, and how we can do it with the Balkhash Lake. But the representatives of the trade platforms, there was a meeting with the ministry and we had 5 trade platforms. I didn't know. Kaspi and other 5 verifiers. They were all talking about this, that there are no specific projects of evaluation. So we have to evaluate the potential of these projects. So we have this case study. Maybe Alexandra, you will be talking in more stricter framework. So we have one case study on Georgia that was a project of support of the reform of the forestry in Georgia. And from the Kazakhstan-German Institute, I have to note that the Kazakhstan-German Institute is also the one from GIS, and we have Olga and the others included into this project. So we saw those projects on climatic change. So Alexandra is here on Garda program with her company, with her study case. Can you hear me well? Okay, very good. Hello, dear colleagues. My name is Alexandra Novikova. I'm the Avantgarde Group representative. I am in Germany, in Berlin. We have our employees in Eastern Europe, in Caucasus, and in Central Asia, in Kazakhstan. Our mission is to create mutual decisions in the climatic financing, and of course, the decarbonization and the zero net on national and local. So Giulia Carbone was talking about the PTC report. I am also the leading author of the 4th report and of the 6th report that will be published in the trust. I would like to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me. And I would like to share my project view, the project of support of the forestry sector reform. Georgia. So the main beneficiaries and the customers were the Ministry of the Environment Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, and the executor was GIZ. Guard Group was developing the application for financing because we had a complex financing with different international donor participation, multilateral and lateral, and also some private financing, and I will talk about that more. So, as per the international financing, so the Switzerland, and what is more important, we received a credit from Crystal Bank, and the Georgian government also put its contribution. So we had a complex financing tool that included the financial support as well as subsidies for technologies and more grown-up finance tools, financial tools as low-rate loans in the future. So the implementation was aimed at 6 years, and it will reduce the emissions or increase the elimination by 16 million tons of CO2. Next slide, please. Why Georgian forests? Because Georgian forests played a key role in this situation. You can see here, and I will comment on that. So the structure of greenhouse emissions, this is the next sector, agriculture. You can see industry, energy sector, and ecosystems. So the forests take 27%. That is why they're very important for the balance of the emissions. The problem is those sectors that were mentioned by the Ministry of Energy, they will increase, and it will be by 70% more. I don't remember the year. They will grow. But the problem is that we have the decreasing number of forests that you can see on the graph in below. And if the forests were taking more than 60 million tons, you can see not the emissions, but so if it was 6 million tons, now it is only 5 million tons, and it will be only 2. What is the problem with the forest? The change of climate, etc. But the main problem is not that. So let's look at the next slide. The main problem is in Kazakhstan and in other countries is that the big part of population, especially of the agricultural regions, use the forests as the heating tool for boiling water and for preparing food. So 90% of agricultural households, they use the trees that they cut out, and this is illegal, of course, deforestation for commercial purposes. So once we don't address these local needs, It is very difficult to talk about the recovery of the forest. So the project will be at the next slide.
Included two components. Specifically, we need to, of course, we need to increase the carbon sequestration capacity of the forest, but in order to do that, we need to not only have sustainable forest management, but better forest management and improve its quality. But we also need to do something with the population, because we can't just tell them to not gather wood, because we need to give them an alternative. And component two, then, importantly, was addressed in order to overcome these barriers and promote alternative energy sources for heating to the population and to increase energy efficiency so that their demand for wood would decrease. Let's stop at component one first, and that is sustainable forest management, which is provided here. The project encompassed 3 regions, and in total, these 3 regions cover 270,000 hectares. And this is a pilot region or a pilot territory where the following measures were offered. So this is specifically planning, regeneration, and restoration of the forest, apart from, let's say, additional plantings. We've also developed measures on increasing the quality of the forest, and not many experts know that it's not only about deforestation in its purest form, but the population used forests like that to also as a pasture for their cattle. Also, it's about maintenance, smart maintenance, care and thinning, and also organizing a management which has them cutting down wood not in just one location, but in different locations where they're allowed to do that. And it also envisions a system of how to harvest timber in the most effective way. And now the second component, it's a component that, as I said, increases energy efficiency and provides alternative types of fuel for the households. On the left, you see this traditional technology, which is used being now. I don't think they're much different from yours. It's just a different cast iron stove. And the level of heat insulation in the houses is not that high, especially in the rural areas, the schools, the hospitals, the regular houses. You can see the windows. So the target of the project was to promote solutions that would first help reduce the demand, do heat insulation, change the windows in the schools, offer more sustainable solutions to produce some pallets, and to offer better stoves with a higher output. What was done to do that? Of course, we offer the population to train them and educate them, just like the other stakeholders, but it's important to understand that one education alone is not enough. So the project also offered subsidies. 30% of the cost of new stoves it was offered to cover. And the problem was not only that, but these stoves you also need to get from somewhere. And that's why they offered free of charge loans to manufacturers of stoves and other technologies like pellets to develop their manufacturing. What that gives us, the outcomes of the project on this slide here. The project has been in place will be in place for 6 years, but it will also continue afterwards as well. So through implementing this project, you can see that from the baseline, which we will have in 2040, we will be able to improve the quality of the forests and reduce the burden on the forests, and this will go back to the level of 2010. I'd like to finish this presentation at that. Just a few conclusions is that forests, of course, have a great potential for decarbonization in our countries, but it's not only the plants and the trees themselves. It's also about smart management, competent management, and until we address the problem of the population's forest use, the issues will not be solved. So that's why we need to involve all of these stakeholders which are involved in the problems arising. Next up, the projects are pretty expensive. So apart from state funding, we need to acquire private funding for these as well. And as my colleagues already mentioned, there are many international projects that can offer support. And of course, we need to use that. And another thing, our colleagues said that, of course, in order to get funding like that, we would need to offer to create a monitoring system and an accounting system for sequestration, because the last a report in Georgia was done in 1986, was 40 years old. And until we do that report, the donors can, of course, invest their money. Of course, a project like that is impossible without state support. Thank you very much for listening. On the last slide, you can see my contact information of Alexander Belly, who represents our company in Kazakhstan. If you have any ideas about natural solutions that you would like to develop, we would be very happy to cooperate with you and to develop these solutions together. So please contact Alexander by phone or by email. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much, Alexander. A very interesting presentation. It's a very concrete project. Of course, return on investment is also important to talk about, but I think we'll be in contact with Alexander at least, and we'll be working on that. And now I'd like to ask Olga Romanovich, just very briefly, if she may speak with her presentation, a case study on supporting agroforestry as one of the nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation. But because this is not a scientific conference, so maybe you can just give us a brief concept and why these projects are needed and how we can join in on them. So Olga, if you don't mind, can we stick to 5 or 6 minutes or so for this? Good day, can you hear me? All right, then everybody, good day. My name is Olga Romanova. I'm an invited expert for forest management. And because the topic of today is natural solutions for mitigating climate change, I'd like to present the topic of agroforestry as one of these natural solutions. Now, as it was said before, mitigation of greenhouse gases can be implemented through 3 main lines. It's prevention, restoration, or sequestration. It can be done through nature-based solutions, industrial technology, and others. So I'm not going to talk about the ecosystems and the soil. Let's just focus on the trees. The trees are natural machines to sequestrate carbon. But the question is, do we have enough land in order to... So planting trees doesn't solve the issue per se. We would need to reduce the emissions, of course, prevent emissions. But in our economy, there will still be emissions because we will continue to produce things and consume things. So sequestration becomes also one of the important tasks at hand. And trees are actually what helps us do that. In the soil as well, but we can't just plant trees all over the place because we need land to produce food. And we could combine planting, growing, agricultural cultures and crops and trees, and that's the best practice. Now, the profits from sustainable agroforestry can be economic, social, and environmental. As you asked me to not go deep into the topic, I can be more detailed about it, what systems provide which benefits in the question and answer session. There's also different types of let's say, types of agroforestry systems. I'm not going to talk about them specifically, but I'm just going to show you a few patterns of what these systems are. So for instance, one of these is alley cropping. It's when agricultural products are grown along trees and in bushes. And you can see as the trees grow, the farmers continue to get benefits from growing agricultural crops, and they interchange crops. Also, you have windbreaks. It's one of these technologies that was used in the Soviet Union and in Kazakhstan as well. It's also forest farming. In our countries, it's kind of more the dacha systems or summer home systems. They can be small or big. You also have riparian buffers. So these are trees along rivers in lakes. Because this is a buffer zone, that's where you need to recover these two-guy forests or create buffer zones so they can protect our water resources. Also, silvopastures, that's integrating trees and pastures and cattle into one unified system. Now, agroforestry and sequestration. It's clear that sequestration of carbon in forest and agricultural systems is through accumulation of oxygen in wood and in soil. You know that in modern agriculture, soil is being disturbed a lot. They keep working and planting, and they keep digging the soil, and that leads to the fact that the carbon comes out of these systems and the soil becomes no more of a sink, not a place of collection of carbon, but on the other hand, there are leakages of carbon from the soil. And so shifting to perennial cultures and wood and trees that grow for dozens of years will help reduce or prevent this situation. But the trees, it's not just about planting and growing trees. You need trees that don't produce there are trees that can produce nuts and fruit in wood as well, can be byproducts. And because you're recovering and restoring the natural habitats, biodiversity, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but there's research that states that they use less chemicals than less insecticides and pesticides, and that also reduces the carbon footprint. It's also known that carbon is accumulated in the trees in these cultures, and that's how sequestration takes place. What are the advantages of these systems compared to private forest management? And we need to understand that we need sustainable forest management. We need to promote private forest management, but we need to also understand that farmers and somebody who wants to just grow a forest, they won't get benefit in the coming 30 years or even maybe 50 to 80 years. And to get profit from trees, you need 100 years. So people won't even get a profit from that while they live. So agroforestry helps produce forest products or wood in parallel to manufacturing agricultural products. So the farmer gets a benefit at the same time that their trees are growing. And if these are fruit trees or nut trees, starting 2010, you can get, after 10 years, you can get profit from your fruits, and you can diversify production and reduce the risks, including climatic risks. So I mean that if you have one crop that died because of a drought, maybe your second crop can give you a yield. And these systems are suitable for small farms and for big farms alike. And at the same time, if you do training and if you interest farmers in implementing good agricultural practices like agroforestry and others, then that takes place at lands where people want to restore their lands and prevent the destruction of their land. It's not like going to a place where nobody lives. logistically it's better to do when it's close by. And based on international research, there's many research that show the potential of agroforestry systems as a mitigation system due to sequestration. And agroforestry is supported by large international organizations such as the FAO, the International Center of Agroforestry, the U.S. Agency for Agriculture, European Agency for Agroforestry, and they confirm that farmers using sustainable practices in agriculture, including agroforestry, is important for a positive transformation of the agricultural sector in order to attain the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what are the prospects of agroforestry in Kazakhstan? As you already heard today, Kazakhstan is going for carbon neutrality by 2060, so implementing these kind of sustainable practices like agroforestry can help in achieving these goals. And today, Aigu was mentioning that she would want to hear what additionally we could do that we don't have in our carbon neutrality goal. Well, agroforestry can also facilitate in achieving this. Agroforestry can also make a contribution to UN SDGs and liquidation of poverty and hunger, help eradicate poverty and hunger, and it can help with convention on climate change, the Paris agreements, and the Biodiversity Preservation Convention. So what do we need to develop agroforestry? First of all, we need to understand the basic baseline. What's going on in Kazakhstan on agroforestry? What exists? What doesn't? Who's doing that? What are the statistics that are being gathered? What scientific data do we have? We need to start with that. We need to start understanding this topic of what's going on now. And then further on, of course, we will need bigger research on fundamental practical issues, what to plant and where, what crops are suitable, what crops we already have, what are the prospects, what can we implement, what is the cooperation that we can instate with international organizations to implement this technology. Of course, we need training and support for the farmers, the agricultural entrepreneurs. We need to create demonstration territories. We need to support cooperation between farmers and researchers and state bodies. The legal framework needs to be assessed, what is going on now, what needs to be changed for these technologies to be able to be used. Financial support, of course, at least to the preliminary stage, in order to do trainings and demonstration territories, pilot projects. We need to show the benefits to farmers to interest them also. There are some which are already interested, but I'm not going to dwell on that. We need to create a network, an extension network in the region. And what I said for number one, the assessment of what's going on, with the initiative of the German Kazakh University, will be a roundtable discussion, 26th or 27th of April 2022 or so. It's going to take place on the potential of the development of private municipal forestry and agroforestry in Kazakhstan, where we'll share the experience and opinions with international organizations, government organizations, and farmers, practitioners. And the roundtable is just the beginning. In terms of the roundtable, you can email Lazat Cyril Baeva, and about forestry, you can contact me. Here's my email. So I think I presented faster than all the other participants. If you have any questions, we can handle those in the questions and answers section. Thank you very much, Olga, for your presentation. That's an example of how you need to approach such a simple thing as planting trees, because we have a practice in Kazakhstan when just planting, we just do regular planting without scientific based, that's not based on scientific evidence. And we need to stop this practice of uninformed planting trees. And we have bodies that approach this scientifically, and we need to have tree planting to not be a negative thing. And your presentation for us is, of course, interesting. It's a good thing that this is developing in Kazakhstan. And since we moved on to our project section now, and we've already talked about the possibilities of projects and some outcomes that we can have, Olga presented the scientific base to implement climate projects correctly. But I'd like to get back and pass the floor to
business.
I want to turn to Viktor Kovalenko on the business and projects on the natural solutions. We understand that every business to become a project, we need a product that we understand some voluntarily projects, some standards, the sale and the return of investment and the scaling. So what Viktor is going to talk about is the standards of verification of the emissions. And Viktor has the 20 years of work in such countries as Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Azerbaijan, and he's closely connected to low carbon economy. So professionally, as a representative and a leader of the sustainable development in our region, Ernst & Young, he will present this information on the standards of verification on the carbon projects connected to the natural solutions. You have advertised me so much that I don't even need to present anything. Yes, we know your analytical skills. So Viktor had a very serious presentation. We understand the problems, and in the framework of this interest, we continue to work further. Yes, I understand that we are a bit behind time, even though I'm a consultant, but without the slides, because I just wanted to tell a story. And the result, I will share the information and you can take it. So I decided not to make slides. So you can get acquainted with the information. First of all, I wanted to talk about nature and natural resources, and the second one on the voluntarily markets of the carbon units and the standards that exist there and how it works. If we talk about nature, natural resources, it's important to mention the news that was very recently released. You heard, many of you, that there is such standard, so-called TCRD. This is for the climatic risks uncoverage in the financial documents in annual, when there is a task force for the risk, financial risk. It came that we have to look at the management system, risk management system, and to the natural resources management system, and the impact that the company or organization is having on the natural resources. And this information should be uncovered because it influences the sustainability, the economics of the company. So another task force for natural resources financial disclosures. This is, as I said, a task force. Thus, this group started to develop a similar standard. So, it will be used in several years so that business starts to evaluate how the natural resources use is influencing its finance and how much the natural resources can be evaluated in monetary means and how to disclose it in the financial reports. So there was a beta version of the risk management system, and it was the key manual on what is the natural resource, how to evaluate the impact if we use them, and how to monetize it, so to say. The second block of this document are recommendations on the disclosure of information from using natural resources. And the third one is the manual on the opportunities. Thus, now we have another process under the IFRS. It started last year at the same time when there was a Glasgow conference. So the objective of this, guys, is to develop the reporting on the sustainable development. TND and their administration is already prepared to be coordinated with those global standards on the sustainable development. I know that they plan to issue another 3 beta versions, one in June, one in September or October, and in the beginning of 2023, they will publish the 3rd beta version. So the culmination at the summer of the next year, they will publish this final manual. This is just the first basic document that allows business to evaluate the risks and opportunities connected to the natural resources. Why did I mention this? In the context of what we're talking about today, and it is very consequent with what I was going to talk about, the markets. Why? Because the standard will allow the part of those projects that generate carbon units, and as the markets are created for such units, you can put it into monetary means. So translate it into financial consequence. So you can write to the organizers, and I will also talk about the carbon units, that there are 2 of the types. So the ones that approve of the emissions of CO2, and others approve the reduction of emissions. That was achieved because of some project, as we were talking about, as we listened about the forestry project, in accordance with the requirement and criteria. So if we talk about the first type, it is on the regulation of emission, and under the market with the second type of units, this is the reduction. usually voluntarily. So the regulated market are the national aims in the framework of Paris Agreement or the carbon neutrality, and the voluntarily market drivers are the companies, the emittents, who take volunteer obligations on reduction of emissions. In 2019, the general market of the units of the second type, it was $5 billion US dollars, and by the next year this is 50 billion US dollars. This is non-regulated once again. From 1950 we can see that there is a reduction that is above the demand by 2-3 times. When there is a regulated system, management system, such voluntary obligations can be taken into consideration. The usual use of such units in those systems that are regulated, it is limited by share. It can be up to 10%, or there are limitations on the types of the project. Here, the regulators come out of what factors? Defining factors for such approach are the support. Yes, for example, forestry, agriculture, and then not to have the overuse of the proposals. At this moment in the European Union, there is no acceptance of such projects, and the big driver of the demand for such carbon units are corporate obligations of the net zero, and also based on the expectations of the market, populations, awards as per the net zero, etc. So the climatic projects that such units can generate, they have to be consequent with 5 principles. First of all, this is the principle of addition. So this is either the reduction of emissions, and with that we have to prove that the project wouldn't be implemented without the additional resources. The second one, the principle of sustainability. So this project foresees not only the reduction, but also the sustainability, so that those emissions don't come back. So it should be built so to prevent the forest fires. For example, we planted a forest and there was a forest fire and all these emissions happened again, so the project comes to just nothing. And the third one is the principle of avoiding of the double reporting. So the volume of the carbon units of this project implementation should be sold only once. I don't think that there is no revolution here. So if we talk about this regulation, then the volume of such things, and it is added to this. And the fourth principle that we have to know, that is the principle of avoiding the disclosure. So our project, its implementation shouldn't lead to this resource being moved to another region. For example, we did some, enhancement of regulation, or we want to implement a project for a reduction of emissions, but the producer will take the source to a region where there is no regulation. This is some kind of protection. That's why we need such, taxing in this sphere, so that we don't have this CO2 enhanced. So if the producers move their factory to neighboring country that doesn't have everything, they import everything to the original country. So those principles are the basics of standards of the carbon units for around 15 or 20 years. But we can say that there are a lot of standards and the requirements are unified. But if we talk about this issue, there is no total consensus yet. So such companies as Microsoft are ready to, on their own, independently develop the projects in order to eliminate the gases from the atmosphere. There is a standard where there is a verification and certification done. And we have also to have the transparent cost information, and for consolidation of such voluntarily market of the carbon units, there was an initiative created, working or task force on the carbon markets. For scaling voluntarily carbon markets. So the developing of a single standard is foreseen in this situation. Once again, what do we have to know? That the voluntary market, compared to the obligatory one, it allows to choose a standard for a specific project. Also, the concept of the mechanism allows to reduce emissions in the most relevant way. You remember the way that the company chooses itself at that moment, where it is the cheapest. And of course, to receive compensation, you can see the quality evaluation of the project. And of course, if we talk about some basic, not maybe 5 or even 2 that are usually looking at such project. The idea of the project, we have to explain what is our idea, how will be the basic plan organized. We look at the initial conditions, we look at the elimination of the emissions, we give evidence that there will be no going out of the basic scenario, and the third stage is the inspection. So the design has to be inspected, should be approved by independent parties to show that it reflects the ideology of the company. And then we start to install new equipment, we plant some trees, and then we start to use the renewable energy sources. And then the third party looks at the project impact and the volume of emissions and the control opportunity during this methodology. So once the trees come to the greenhouse to the greenhouse. So we have this period during which we can actually measure the absorption. So while the trees are absorbing, so the carbon unit is equal to the emission volume were produced, were put into register and verification until the life cycle of the project, it is such. And then the process of buying. So for each unit, we need the serial number. And in order to avoid this double registration and the receival of this compensation unit through a special approach. As per these standards, we have a lot, but the main ones are the voluntarily markets of carbon units.
Key ones that are out there, there's 3 of them, although I can name a few more. So there's this VCS verified carbon standard. It's about 65–66% of all the issued carbon units on voluntary markets last year. About 14% is a so-called gold standard. There is also a clean development mechanism. And there are some specific country-specific ones, like the American Carbon Registry, about 5–5.5% units. And if I'm not mistaken, Canadian Climate Action Reserve, there's out there also, and many others. Research that I mentioned, we consider them, name them. There's more than 10, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So trying to conclude on this, what was I saying? That these standards, and the 2 key ones, the verified carbon standard and the gold standard, make up the biggest niche. They cover the main types, all the key types of projects, for instance, renewable energy sources, forests, waste disposal and processing, biogas, and so forth. And they have their own specifics in our research. You can read up on that. And some of these standards could be even used for Kazakhstan, because some of these standards do have geographical limitations and some don't. For instance, the one that I mentioned, Climate Action Reserve, that's only a North American standard. And the geography that it covers is Canada, US, and Mexico. And the carbon units of regulated markets is only for the North American system. And if we're to look at the standard verified carbon standard, that one's geography is the whole world. And as a certain country adapts its legal framework, it can receive carbon units issued by that standard. So if our country can do that, and we'll be able to adapt our legal framework, then issuing carbon units based on voluntary standard, like the verified carbon standard, participants of such projects will be able to get these carbon units and account them against their obligations for quotas in the framework of the Kazakhstan ETS. And that, I think, would be sound support for our companies, for the government to be able to implement this and to give an opportunity to not only kind of try to build their own little projects, homemade, but use international, globally recognized standards. So that's all I wanted to say, and you can read about that in the research. You can read about these markets. There's a lot of information. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Victor. You really inspired us, and I'd like to say that creating this new market in Kazakhstan is possible And there are many things that already do exist here. And possibly business should think about that. They should think about whether they have enough of these units and look at what the carbon tax is going to be. If it's going to be so high that it's going to threaten the financial situation of the company, then we have a clear deficit of these offset units that companies would want to buy, but they don't have them on the Kazakhstani market. And so this idea, this is what we were talking about, to somehow tie the good idea of conserving ecosystems, and business will be also initiating, creating markets and creating commercial projects on preserving nature. Only business can do that. They have that expertise. But if the situation around is such that it becomes possible, then I think that would be great. And I think our discussion is very timely today. It's exactly the right moment right now. And so the doctrine has not been approved yet, but at least some opportunities we can talk about for these voluntary units. Many documents, so our reports on an international level also can take these factors into account. And Julia was saying that already now these companies that participate in projects like that, they can do promotion through their own network, and that's what they also do. So what they do is they want the companies that are on the market, for the companies that do that for the market to see it. Yeah. So far, we don't have these voluntary units like a commodity, but at least from the standpoint of businesses participating in those for those who are exporting, that's important. And what's important also is this news that there exists this standard and these different standards of carbon offsets, and business should also take into account take that into account, and the risks and the quantitative assessment will significantly impact how, from the standpoint of financial access, a certain company looks like, which we have many of in Kazakhstan. So thank you very much. I would like to pass the floor to Galina. If the audience have any questions, and we have, if our group here is still there, although it's Friday, it's almost holidays already, and we're seeing that people are interested based on our discussions in the chat and here in the audience. And if there are questions to Victor, let's ask them now. If not, we can, after you look through the materials, ask the questions in writing. Can I ask a question to Victor? So these carbon units for the voluntary reduction, where do you get them from? Well, I talked about them in the very beginning. You get them from projects on sequestration of CO2 or reducing emissions. But I mean, look, so in the project, they specify the scope of sequestration and reduction, but they should be accounted for, and they should be implemented. So in Kazakhstan, for instance, the authorized body, they don't coordinate these carbon units. They don't have them. So there's a certain balance. As you said, there shouldn't be any profit of these, for surplus of these units. In Kazakhstan, we have a very good experience, a case that investments into renewable energy sources are already on the market, and the AFC verifies them. So it's a case where some projects have already been approved. I'm not going to talk about their specific status right now, but probably they're voluntary. Now, there is a carbon cadastre and a budget, and we need to understand that there is a mandatory system of carbon regulation and, as Victor mentioned now, a voluntary one. So it's clear, I mean, some of these projects get an approval, some don't, and there's different categories of projects, and I just like to understand how this mechanism of accounting works, because this registry, this balance sheet, there should be a clear understanding of how and where you can implement a voluntary project. I go once again then. Your question is, as far as I understand it, how the carbon units obtained on the voluntary market can be used in Kazakhstan. Is that right? Yes, like as a private company is in the ETS system, but at the same time in our code, it says that it can't implement reduction projects, but at the same time, it can participate in some voluntary projects. So how can they get recognized for these voluntary units? So there are several questions in that. I pretty much said that, so let me be more clear. First thing is, right now, the units obtained at voluntary markets to take into account against quotas in Kazakhstan is not going to work because we don't have that legal framework. That's exactly why I said that to be able to connect to that market, the government needs to work on adapting the legal framework, like to legally receive the carbon units issued based on some of these standards to be accounted in the Kazakhstani system. For instance, Russia already is following that, and they've already announced that as part of their developed carbon regulation, they are planning to take these VCS systems and to allow them for circulation on their market. So why can't we do that? We definitely can. And to answer a second question, where to get these units from, in order for them to appear, you need to go through these 6 steps that I mentioned as part of the climate project implementation. When it was verified and confirmed that as a result of this project, there will be a certain level of reduction, and at the same time, these 5 principles will be complied with, or not reduction, but sequestration. And for one of the standards of the voluntary market that you've chosen, these units of reduction will be converted into carbon units, and then you can use them. And the third aspect of your question, in terms of the voluntary markets, I already mentioned that too. That's why they're voluntary, because the main driver there is voluntary responsibilities or obligations of the company. So for instance, let's give, for example, let's say with no names, right? Company X, that nobody mandates it to arrive at carbon neutrality by a certain time frame, but they take on a certain obligation to do that. So for it, the voluntary market opens, on which by international standards, they buy verified carbon units, they put them on their balance sheet, and thus they show that they're reducing or replacing their emissions. But that has nothing to do with any government regulation. That's why the market is called voluntary. The key problem of this voluntary market is the low prices. So the prices are quite low because the demand is not high. If I remember correctly, it's 1, 2, 3, or 5 euros or dollars per unit. I mean, there have been rarely higher prices. It's kind of evident because the demand for voluntary units is not that high, and it's mostly due to the demand of large international companies that take on voluntary obligations and commitments and that thus buy units at voluntary markets. As governments keep developing their legal framework, adding these voluntary standards of the market and to allowing to take units bought there and to account them against national quotas, then it will become more interesting to buy these units on these voluntary markets. So business needs to kind of just wait until this whole legal framework. Yeah, the business should be creating the demand. If business doesn't take on these voluntary obligations, this market will never grow. Why is business always waiting for it to be pushed with regulations? So our goal is to say that business has its own opportunity to move this new market that will be useful for it. So this money, you still, in the green economy projects or any funds that you have right now, but if you create a market voluntarily, something that is interesting to you in your region, we have an eco-share association, regional one, you can do memorandums and you can voluntarily. What if they don't get reconciled? See, that's what Victor just mentioned. You are hitting the nail on the head. So please call us anytime and we can do a Zoom call with you for an hour-long Zoom call and go step by step and cover everything. If we can't, we'll get experts involved. We're happy that you're asking questions. And now, once again, let's thank Victor. Thank you, Victor. This is what we needed. And this is what we needed to have a little logical understanding of why we're here. And allow me to talk about the next steps, right? Pass the floor to Ms. Galina. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Golsara. And then allow me you can see my presentation, right? Thank you very much. And just listening to today's very interesting and informative presentations, I was looking at the discussion in the chat, and we're seeing how experts in the field of water resources, they're concerned about these issues. So we have subsoil waters, surface waters, and floods, and in city environment, water bodies as well. There's a large number of issues that the society is concerned with. Firstly, we're talking about society, right? And to solve these issues in a targeted way. So what does the discussion tell us? That it's impossible to solve them targetedly. In the legal framework that we have now, although it's good, but it doesn't allow to solve these issues either. And that's what Julia and Bulat said in their big presentations in the beginning, that by solving the issues in a targeted way, we always arrive at a certain barrier, and we can't overcome it until we look at these issues in a broader sense, in terms of why we need these systems, why we need the air, why we need the water and the soil and the mountains and the forests. And only then, if we review our approaches, then we can see the way out of these situations sooner or later that arise before us on a daily basis. So our new platform that we started discussing 1 year ago, and we continue today, and we will continue it further, is what we call the initiative from the below. So it's what's born from the expert community together with the civil society groups. And as part of this initiative, we suggest the following. We suggest for those who have the same opinion as us to unite and to keep promoting the initiative that we need to recognize the conservation of Kazakhstan's natural ecosystems as the basis for climate conservation and sustainable development of the country's regions, to contribute to the integration of goals for the conservation of natural ecosystems of Kazakhstan as a priority into the legislation and development programs of the country, to initiate expert support for changes in corporate and governance and methods of interaction between stakeholders to create favorable conditions for the restoration and expansion of ecosystems, to strengthen ecosystems as a basis to solve climate tasks that the country has, which means to solve the issues of strengthening the competitiveness of the economy of Kazakhstan overall, and to initiate a review of existing creating new state measures to support business models, production and consumption, trade and industry, aimed at systematic actions to preserve local ecosystems.
Каким образом мы видим, да, мы вот, может быть, эту конференцию, вот как сегодняшняя и прошлогодняя, мы хотели бы сделать ежегодной, и, может быть, даже замечательно, что она так получилась у нас в канун начала, так сказать, да, года, начала весны.
The Day of Earth and the Environment, and through local goals. This platform that we want to create on the basis of our association, this is something that was discussed today, the single platform that will unite us for the principles of the natural sources for the climatic objectives. How do we see the opportunity for creating such platform? We see in Kazakhstan there is a group, business groups and non-governmental ones, and the expert society, that we have a single mission. We understand the single reporting standards, what Victor was talking about. We understand the integration, and we know how to integrate the efforts of the stakeholders so that we could exchange data. And why are we looking at this platform being able to take this work at itself? Because we have more than 20 years of expert work in different groups, including the governmental groups, working with NGOs. We have the Center of Competencies that allows us to implement the educational and training programs, and we have our journals through which we can push forward the creative ideas that are now developed at the level of discussion. If we talk about such platforms, the first one is, of course, initiated by UN. That is the 10th anniversary of UN Recovery of Ecosystems. Under these initiatives, there are different networkings and other initiatives that gather experts and people who are ready to push this forward, so that contacts to connect with us, we have those links for this forum that we have today. And it will be the basis for networking in Kazakhstan. We are ready to take such function of gathering. If those who are here see the interconnection, will be happy to hear the feedback, and we're open for all interactions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Galina, very much. I want to add that Julia also suggested to become a part of their platform, the Alliance of Natural Resources. This is a very important topic. And also I want to add that we looked through the ones that we have big associations that do regional ones. There are institutes, Nazarbayev Institute, and a range of others. Our Al-Farabi Institute, Kazakhstan, German Research Institute. You can see that this is a complex solution, and business has to create a market without stakeholders. This is not possible. And the business with such projects is the practical case to include the business management. You can see different forms. We just want to gather everybody. Thank you all.
С нами за участие. Булат хочет, да? Ага, Булат, пожалуйста.
Я очень быстро. Спасибо за организацию этого совещания. Это очень важный вопрос. Я просто хотел бы еще раз, я скинул в чат как бы резюме своего доклада. Значит, Всемирный экономический форум и предыдущий доклад «Конец капитализма» и другие, они очень четко сказали, что решение, основанное на природных процессах для адаптации, вообще для сохранения климата и для целей устойчивого развития, это не то, что решение, где есть, сейчас будут приписывать к этим решениям все, дрова, значит, рыбы и так далее. Это не точечный подход. Это подход, основан на сохранении естественных природных экосистем. Это первый принцип, который надо будет учитывать. Поэтому вот эта вот торговля выбросами и так далее, квотами, это все очень важно, но надо при этом не забывать как бы в общий контекст вот этот подход. Потому что торговля выбросами – это тоже экосистемный подход, но он основан на планетарной экосистеме, на критической температуре потепления. И второй главный принцип – это вовлечение общественности. Нельзя сейчас компаниям увлечься сейчас гонками за этими прибылями, за этими фондовой биржей в Нью-Йорке и так далее, активами. Это все неустойчиво. То есть решения, основанные на природных процессах, это вот экосистемный подход, его ключевой принцип – это вовлечение, участие населения не в виде там семинаров, а чтобы они были вашими акционерами. То есть необходимо совместно это делать, это более надежный подход, более правильный подход и устойчивый для инвестиций. Спасибо, Гульсар, еще раз.
Да, спасибо большое. Вот участники нас тоже поздравляют с наступающими праздниками. Я думаю, мы сегодня достаточно получили информации для того, чтобы поразмышлять и определить для себя, как экспертов, как участников этого процесса, какое-то взаимодействие. Спасибо, до свидания, всего хорошего.
До свидания. Спасибо.
Спасибо, до свидания, всех с праздником. И